Hey everyone, it's Ankylosaur. I hope you're all doing well. Today, I have another competitive Pauper EDH deck tech for you. This time on my Satyr Enchanter list that I took to the top 4 of the last Sanctuary Open Series event. I'm going to discuss where the deck is now and the card choices I've made, but also a few cards that I've been considering adding to the list, in case those are more appealing to you than the ones I'm currently running. My deck lists are always in flux, and especially in a 100-card singleton format with an ever-shifting tournament meta, no list is ever going to be quote-unquote perfect or even finished. But I'm happy with where the deck is at for the moment, and I'd like to share with you what the list looks like. So with that out of the way, let's talk some Satyr Enchanter. First up, we should discuss what the commander itself does. His rules text is incredibly simple. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, draw a card. Drawing extra cards is one of the more powerful things you can do in a game of Magic, and when Satyr gets going, we can just fly through our deck, picking up an extra 2, 3, even 4 plus cards a turn. We have 11 1-mana enchantments and 18 2-mana ones, and a couple of those even draw an additional card when they enter the battlefield. So it's very easy for us to double or even triple spell during a turn. And as nearly half of the spells in the deck are enchantments, most of our cards replace themselves with Satyr in play. The upshot of this is, we often have a full grip of cards, we're drawing lands to ensure that we hit our land drops every turn, and we're able to dig for spells that protect our commander or find our disruption to stop our opponent's game plans. I'll talk about all of this more in depth in a second, but generally speaking, if you like the idea of a more mid-rangey game plan with some Voltron elements to it, shutting down key creatures from your opponents while dealing massive amounts of commander damage, Satyr might be the deck for you. So, let's get into the card breakdowns. First, we have the mana base. Unlike my Aranis Street Urchin deck, which you can find the deck tech for on my channel, Satyr doesn't get any real special use out of its lands. But that doesn't mean there aren't some opportunities for a little bit of tech. For instance, we're running all 3 of the artifact lands that produce green or white mana. These are for exactly 1 card in the deck, and that's all that glitters. Unlike regular Commander, Pauper EDH doesn't have a ton of ways to punish you for including artifacts in your mana base. No one's going to play a Bane of Progress or something and destroy your Ancient Den. So these are much less risky to add, and getting an additional +1/+1 off of a land drop sometimes is definitely worth it. We also have both of the dual lands that have the basic land types on them. These are perfect to grab with our land cycling creatures, Generous Ent and Eagles of the North, in case we need some fixing. We do get a couple of utility lands, in Satyr Steppe and, I guess, Opal Palace? I wasn't sure how to classify Opal Palace. But being able to recast Satyr as a 4/4 or larger if he dies can be huge. And Satyr Steppe is a great way to get one of our huge threats past someone's blockers. I'm not running Crop Rotation as an instant speed way to grab it for protection from a removal spell, especially since our other lands are almost all devoted to just tapping for mana, but if you like the idea, certainly include it. Finally, here are a few of the land auras in the deck. I'm only running 5 total, and these 3 are the best of them. I've seen lists that run mana dorks, like Avacyn's Pilgrim or Fyndhorn Elves, in order to get a turn 2 Satyr going more often, and I like the idea, but I found that I usually want to play a removal aura on turn 2, shutting out someone's Gretchen, Malcolm, or Dargo, rather than running out Satyr. The mana dork plan isn't a bad one though, so if you wanted to make a somewhat more turbo version of the deck, those are a good addition as well. That brings us to the creatures that we're actually playing in the deck. We only have 15 creatures in total, and a few of those, like the Land Cyclers and Blessed Hippogriff, we usually don't cast as creatures. However, as we're generally winning the game through a Voltron strategy of enchanting one creature with a bunch of auras and hitting people for tons of damage all at once, we don't need a particularly diverse threat package. So that said, here are the creatures that I'm running. First, we have our biggest threats. These are creatures that, with a handful of auras, can end someone's game all on their own. Gnarlback Rhino in particular is a house in this deck, drawing us an additional card every time we target it, turning all of our little auras into 1 or 2 mana divinations with Satyr in play. The evasion on Aura Gnarlid is also huge, generally making it unblockable against at least one player. And in the late game, when we have a lot of mana available, being able to pump Slumbering Keep Guard 2 or 3 times can easily close out the game. We also have a couple creatures that I'm running specifically for their evasion, and those are Silhana Ledgewalker and Gingerbrute. Both are difficult to block, with Ledgewalker's hexproof making it an ideal target for auras, knowing that our opponents can't target it with targeted removal in response. If you wanted to go more of a green-white Bogles direction with the deck, I could see running Gladecover Scout, and maybe even something like Sacred Wolf as well. Personally, I traded the protection from the hexproof for evasion by running Gingerbrute instead. My primary aura target in the deck has always been the Satyr Enchanter itself, and I like the evasive creatures for when I can't get in with commander damage, or want to diversify my threats to play around edicts. But if your playstyle leans more towards playing a bunch of Bogles, by all means add them to the creature base. They're often very difficult to deal with, and can get out of hand after only a couple of auras. Next up, we have a couple of creatures to tutor auras out of the deck. I'll be honest, I'm not sure how I feel about Totem Guide Heartbeast, but I also don't know that I've ever drawn it since adding it to my list, so it's sort of untested for me at the moment. 5 mana is a lot, and I worry there will be times that we won't cast it all game because we'll want to hold up protection or disruption instead. But the Heartbeast is also a 5 toughness creature that always draws one of the best cards out of our deck, so I'm cautiously optimistic about it. Anyway, let me know in the comments how you feel about Totem Guide Heartbeast in CPDH. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Finally, here are a couple of support creatures. Suture Priest won't be gaining us a ton of life, but it's very good at slowing down the Flicker combo decks, as they can't infinitely blink their Peregrine Drake or Abdel while this is in play. And Deathblade Elite is a tiny little monster with an early aura on it. With its Provoke ability, a Deathblade on turn 1 into something that buffs it up will eat whatever the most impactful creature is on board every single turn until someone finally deals with it. And later, if you can't kill something with it, you can still use it to force a block and sneak through some damage from your other creatures as well. Next, I wanted to talk about the cards that make our creatures into the scary threats this deck is known for, and those are the combat auras. Green and white get access to nearly all of the biggest and best auras in the format. Red can give menace and haste, blue has some more evasive auras, but for raw power, Selesnya is pretty much unmatched. Some of the strongest cards in our deck are these 4 auras right here: Imperial Armor, Ethereal Armor, All That Glitters, and Ancestral Mask. We're running a total of 41 enchantments in our deck, and with the number of cards we see off of our commander, it's not unusual for a single one of these to give +8/+8 or more, which makes for an incredibly fast clock. Ancestral Mask in particular often turns our commander into a one-shot kill, and in combination with something that gives trample, suddenly any one of our creatures is threatening to end the game on its own. We also have a number of smaller buffs for our creatures. These are sort of the bread and butter of the deck, auras that we can cast for just 1 mana to get our card draw trigger, that give our creature a keyword and a small increase in power. Citizen Training is in the deck primarily because it draws us a card, but the trample is incredibly relevant as well, considering that many of our largest creatures, like Yavimaya Enchantress, don't trample on their own. That brings us to the auras that grant our creatures some sort of evasion. Shield of the Oversoul is one of the best cards in our deck, giving Satyr +2/+2 as well as Flying and Indestructible, which are both very powerful keywords in the format. But Angelic Gift is another aura that draws us an extra card and grants Flying, and Treetop Bracers gives any of our threats Silhana Ledgewalker's pseudo-unblockability, as there aren't a lot of decks in the format that run many flyers. Finally, we also have other ways of winning the damage race, by gaining life off of our massive threats. Lifelink and Squire's Devotion both grant keyworded lifelink, but Spirit Link and Armadillo Cloak give the older, triggered version of the ability, which means that we can also cast them on opposing creatures to gain life whenever they deal damage, or in conjunction with the lifelink ability to gain double the life. It's just an added bit of versatility on those two that will come up from time to time. Next, I wanted to highlight the deck's removal suite. Green-White isn't known for its Doomblade style effects, and it doesn't have access to any sweepers that are particularly relevant in the format, but that doesn't mean it's lacking for ways to deal with creatures or interrupt combo attempts. Let's talk about a few of them here. First, we have our instant speed spells. Last Breath only exiles creatures that have power 2 or less, but in CPDH, this hits a ton of very relevant creatures, like Malcolm, Kedis, land untappers out of Gretchen, any of the guild mages, and so on. I'm also running 2 bite spells, which let one of our creatures deal damage equal to its power to an opponent's creature. There are more of these available, and it might be worth running all of them, as instant speed interaction is at a premium, but the trade-off is that you do need a creature in play, and they aren't auras, so you won't draw a card off of them with Satyr. So for right now, I'm just trying 2 of them. Speaking of auras, here are our 7 Arrest and Lignify style effects, which either make it so a creature can't attack or block, or turn off their abilities, or both. These are the staple removal spells of the deck, perfect for shutting down a Gretchen or a Guild Mage, keeping a Dargo at bay forever, or taking away Malcolm's abilities so the pirate combo doesn't work. Chains of Custody is the odd one out, as it's sort of an Oblivion Ring style effect on an aura, but I included it here so I could use it as a segue to the next slide. These are the 3 other enchantments that hang out in play and exile a permanent until they leave the battlefield. In general, I'd say that these are probably worse on commanders than the auras that leave them in play without their abilities, but are better against non-commanders because they can deal with those creatures permanently. But if you ever need to deal with a commander with an Oblivion Ring, it certainly does the trick. Next is Seal of Primordium, which is a disenchant that gets to stay in play and threaten its activation. There are other good disenchants one could run either instead of or in addition to this. Seal of Cleansing is the white version of the same effect, and I love Return to Nature because of its flexibility, with the Graveyard Hate stapled onto it as well. But regardless of which one you choose, I would include at least one of these style of cards in the deck, just to have it around in case you need it. And lastly, though Relic of Progenitus isn't technically removal, I included it here because it's disruptive to the graveyard decks and the flicker decks, and is an all-around great way to make sure you don't get comboed on while you're setting up your own game plan. Worst case scenario, you're in a pod that doesn't care about graveyards, and you can cycle it away for 1 mana. So that brings us to our final group of cards, and those are the protection spells. While our deck can function without Satyr Enchanter in play, and we can afford to lose one of our big threats every now and then, we'd very much prefer to keep them around, as we've likely invested a good number of auras into them. So these are the cards that will help keep our creatures alive. We have 7 instants that do a variety of things, granting hexproof and or indestructible, or giving protection to our creature. I should note that Vines of Vastwood and Stave Off can also interfere with opposing combo attempts, as they make it so our opponent can't target their creature with a Freed from the Real, or a Flicker spell, or a type changer to turn it into a pirate. They're very versatile spells that do so much work for just 1 mana. Speaking of interrupting combo attempts, we also have 3 auras that grant protection at flash speed. Not only are these great at keeping our creatures alive, they can be used as more disruption, too. Ward of Lights is the worst of these 3, as you have to sacrifice it at end of turn if you flashed it in, but the effect is a powerful one, and the versatility of being able to play it at instant speed definitely makes it a card I want to include here. Next are our Umbras, Snake Umbra and Hyena Umbra, which buff our creatures and give them an extra layer of protection in case they would be killed. Hyena Umbra is one I wanted to especially point out, as in combination with Deathblade Elite, it lets the little guy go on a rampage on turn 2. A 2/2 First Striker may not sound like much, but the fact that he can provoke opposing creatures into blocking him and kill them off with First Strike damage makes him incredibly annoying for our opponents. It's an old 60-card Pauper trick that I picked up from the mono-white heroic deck, and I think it has the potential to be just as strong in this format as well. Here we have two permanents that get to hang out in play and serve as a free bit of protection for our creatures. Broken Fall being especially good, because we can use it as a card draw engine with Satyr if we have a ton of mana and nothing else to do with it. And lastly, these three cards are all excellent at keeping us alive. Righteous Aura and Gossamer Chains can keep unblocked creatures from dealing us damage, and Prismatic Strands is just a Pauper all-star, preventing all damage of a color of your choice twice due to its relatively free flashback cost. This affects our creatures too, being able to save the board from a big Crypt Rats activation, or it can turn combat against a monocolored deck into a huge blowout as well. So there you have the Satyr Enchanter CPDH deck tech. As always, please let me know down in the comments if you have any suggestions for cards I may have missed. I'm always looking for some sweet new tech, and I'd love to hear what you think of the deck or of the video in general. Thanks so much for watching, everybody, and I'll see you next time.